What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am at the coolest gym in New Jersey with my friend Blake, who has come all the way from Arizona, and he has a master's in exercise science. So we are going to be breaking down for you guys the correct way to train glutes. So everything that you are doing to train your glutes is essentially wrong. So the biggest thing that we see is females especially doing non-optimal exercises. So whenever you take that resistance band and go on the Stairmaster, or you're doing crab walks or whatever it is with the band, debunk that.
So basically what happens when we add like a band, people think they're getting this sensation that they think they're working their glutes way more, but what you're really doing is just taking away from the exercise that you're trying to do. So like, let's say you're trying to do like a bridge or a thrust, putting a band around your legs, you might have to have a little abduction and external rotation, and you'll feel that, and you'll feel like you're working the muscle more, but what you're really doing is taking away from the hip extension, which is what we're trying to work. So once you take that hip extension away, you're taking away the amount you can actually overload the muscle with, which will lead to less glute gains, which is not what we want.
A lot of the times we'll train based on how we feel. Well, I've done this in the past, and that's why it's taken me so long to get the physique that I have now, because I would just train based off of feeling versus training off of science. So if you want to grow your glutes, you have to be doing the squat, hip thrust, deadlift, lunge correctly, and then loading that over time with more weight or more progression. So Blake, a lot of my clients that are watching this or are working out at home, so if they see this and they're like, we don't have barbells or heavier dumbbells, what are some things that they can do at home to work their glutes and progress?
So some good glute exercises at home. So assuming you don't have any like barbells or anything, we can hope you have like at least some dumbbells. So it'd be good to start with like RDLs with dumbbells with whatever you have. But again, like we're talking about, you're just gonna be focusing on that hip hinge and driving through. So doing those with dumbbells or whatever you have in the moment, that's where will give you your most bang for your buck, is doing anything that you can focus on hip extension and driving through. So even if you have like a little step, you can do step ups with that, focusing on loading that hip extension and driving through, loading that hip extension, driving through. So basically any exercise, we're really emphasizing hip extension will help you out there. And again, you just have to use what resources you have.
So we're gonna show you now what you should be doing. So squats, deadlift, and hip thrust, and then the proper form. So first we'll be showing the hip thrust, which a lot of the times is done incorrectly. So you first want to make sure that you have the bench set up to the proper height where your hips can be in line with your knees.
Yeah, so make sure you have a hip pad on there. All right, make sure you're square. What's this? Let's move this. So setup's really important for this exercise. So we want to make sure our feet are about shoulder width going in. And then as we come up, we're going to have a nice brace. So she's going to come up and make sure she's nice and flat. So we want a nice neutral spine here. So a lot of people, when they're coming down, they'll like tilt their hips and they'll go into a pelvic tilt and squeeze up. We don't want that. We want to keep a brace while we're going. So then if you go up, then we're coming down with a nice controlled tempo. Right about there, and then squeeze up and squeeze at the top. So we're really working the glutes here. Squeeze up. And we want to keep a vertical shin. That's really important for making sure the emphasis stays on the glutes. So squeezing up. She's doing a great job of that. Shin staying vertical, keeping a neutral spine, and squeezing up. Good. That looks really good there. Squeezing up. There we go. Nice there. Perfect. And then so, like common faults we'll see are when people go too long, they'll use too much momentum. She had a really nice tempo, so if we have like a slow eccentric, you know, like a 3-second eccentric, and then squeeze up and pause at the top, we'll get the most out of that exercise that way.
And then a lot of the times, you'll just do the hip thrust, dead stop, where you're bringing it down like this between every rep. Setup's very important. Coming down, so this is dead stop. And a lot of people will only do this variation, but it's also good to do a different variation. It's called the calf glute bridge, where you're keeping constant tension. So you'll come up, and instead of bringing it down, you'll stop here, keeping your shins vertical the whole time.
Squeezing up. There we go. And that'll really emphasize the glutes. Nice and controlled there.
And when would you program one over the other?
It just depends on what you're trying to emphasize. So I would program the calf glute bridge more for when you want to focus on glutes. And then the dead stop, that'll involve more hamstring. So that's more like total posterior work, depending on what your goals are.
And that's the biggest thing too. There's no one perfect exercise for every single person. You have to find what works for you. You have to find what you are progressing with and what is working well for your body. So a lot of the times people will look at random Instagram workouts and just try to mimic someone else, and someone else looks totally different or a different body type than you, and it wouldn't translate the same way. So once you understand the basics and the fundamentals, then you can choose how to progress them based on how your body's responding. So the next exercise we're gonna be showing is the deadlift. So Blake, if you want to focus on the glutes, which variation should you do?
So if you want to emphasize the glutes, you should really focus on doing an RDL variation. So not a stiff-legged deadlift, but a true RDL where we're really focusing on hinging at the hips and driving our hips backwards.
Okay. Do you want to demonstrate?
Yeah, I can demonstrate. So when setting up for an RDL, our setup's the most important part. You want to stay about shoulder width. You want to find what's comfortable for you. And for me, getting a proper brace is just a huge part to making sure you execute this correctly. So what I'm thinking about is drawing my rib cage down, and then I'm pushing out against my obliques. So I'm flexing, I'm not really contracting, but I'm flexing out and pushing against the obliques. So bringing down, flexing here, and then I come down to the bar. I find my grip here, brace, pull the slack out of the bar, and drive up. So that's where we get to the top. And now, when starting the descent, I'm thinking about hinging at the hip to start the movement. I'm not reaching down, I'm pushing my butt back to start the movement. Getting right about here, pausing, and squeezing up. So I'm really driving my hips back to bring me forward. I'm holding this position, and then squeezing through. So hips are coming back, bars moving down, get a slight pause there, and squeeze the hips through. Come down, there, and squeeze through. So that's basically the execution we want, and the more we're able to push our hips back, the more glute emphasis we'll have for the exercise.
And one of the biggest tips that helps me is thinking to pull the slack out of the bar and locking your lats first. So do you want to demonstrate that?
So we'll get our brace here. I'm pulling the slack out of the bar and then beginning the movement. And again, the bar path is going straight up and straight down. That's another great indicator as far as going straight down and straight up. There we go. Just like that.
I'll show what not to do, because this is really hard for me. Okay. Here's what not to do. If it looks like this, drop the weight and practice your hinge. So what I think about is pulling everything down and then pretending that I'm shutting a door behind me so your butt goes back first. So next up is the squat. Now, look at the shoes I'm wearing. A lot of the times people wear shoes like this or running sneakers, which is not what you want to do. So I wear squat shoes, which have a lifted heel, which really, really help because ankle mobility is a huge factor of your squat. So Blake has a lot better ankle mobility than me, so he's wearing shoes that are completely flat. So ideally, one day I'll be able to perfectly squat like this, but for now, I'm using these. So if you feel like your squat doesn't feel right, check your shoes.
And then, in case you don't have like Olympic shoes, you can usually get like a slam board, like what we have here. So this will accomplish the same goal as what the Olympic lifters do by giving you a slant. So even if you have that limited ankle mobility, this will really help with that. And if you don't have this, you can use like 5-pound plates underneath your heels. Worst case scenario, you just got to work with what you have. So we have that.
Okay, so Blake will be demonstrating the squat from start to finish.
So assuming you have the proper ankle mobility, we'll just start with flat shoes here. So again, setup's really important. We want to make sure we have an even grip on the bar. You have to find what works for you. Go about here, make sure you're right in the middle. So again, I'm thinking about my brace here. I'm drawing my rib cage down, pushing out against my obliques, and driving up. So our elbows are down, chest is down, nice and flexed and braced. Hinging at the hip to begin the movement, and then squatting down, stay nice and tight, holding there, and driving up. So we're hinging, squatting down, making sure our feet are maintaining good contact with the ground, holding there, and driving up. So keeping my elbows down will really help keep me braced as well, because it's helping keep my lats nice and tight so the weight doesn't bury me forward. So I'm holding it there, getting the movement down, holding down, and driving up. So hinge here, squat down, there. Drive up. There we go. So there's a squat there. There we go. So points of emphasis on the squat are just keeping your center of balance. A lot of people will either fall forward or backwards, and that just starts with having a good position and finding a comfortable spot on your back for the bar. And then as you're going down, you should keep a good rooting. So you want the 3 points of contact for the tripod on your foot. So under the big toe, under the pinky toe, and your heel. Those are the 3 points of contact you always want to maintain when you're squatting. And if you're able to maintain that and drive up evenly, you'll have a good squat.
And this is now what you shouldn't be doing. So we're going to show you some things that I've seen on Instagram that are just completely wrong. Okay, so I'm just going to start doing these exercises I saw on Instagram, and Blake's going to tell me why they're wrong. All right, here we go. I saw this one. So she had the weight here, and she was doing this.
Oof. So what people think they're loading here is they think they're getting that abduction because they see that glutes work abduction. But what's really happening here, when you go in that position and you're lifting up, the piriformis is really taking over. So once you're in that 90-degree position, you're gonna just be working your piriformis, and that's a muscle under your glute. And a lot of people will do this, and they'll just get extreme tightness in their like hips, and it could even lead into back tightness, which is something we don't want. And even if we were loading this for like abduction, you have to stabilize. Like it's a poor stabilizer, and we can't really overload this movement at all. Like you're not gonna get much heavier than this, which is gonna lead to no gains, which is something we don't wanna do.
What can you do instead? A squat, a deadlift, or a hip thrust with proper form. So the next exercise that I saw on Instagram, she had this. She was actually elevated on a plate, but she was doing a lunge with this band here. So she was like this. So, optimal or not?
Not optimal.
Why?
So I really don't even know what you're trying to load here. Like, I guess you're trying to get some added stability here, but what you're really doing is just taking away from that hip extension that you're trying to load. So instead of trying to do a lunge with a band, just add weight and progressively overload that way so we can focus on that hip extension and driving through. And as that gets easier and easier, you just add more weight, add more reps, and progress that way, and that's what'll give you the most optimal gains.
Okay, and the last one is doing band on the Stairmaster. What are your thoughts on that one?
I don't get what's going on here. You're just barely loading your glutes at all. You're not getting any type of optimal load. In reality, you're just working your hip flexors and tiring your hip flexors out, and you're doing way too many reps when you're trying to do cardio. It really has no place in a workout, in my opinion.
So, what do we say to the band?
Throw it away.
Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our little 101 on glutes, and definitely the boring stuff, the stuff that your form might not be the best at, is the stuff that you should practice and do. And in a year from now, in 2 years from now, if you're patient, you will have the physique of your dreams. All right, I'm starving, so this video has to end. See you later.